r/ProRevenge, Coworker mocked my dead brother, so I exposed his affair. Hashtag chunk 1. The fake sympathy card was waiting on my desk when I arrived Monday morning. I knew it was fake before I even opened it. The envelope had that pristine quality of something printed at the office, too perfect, too new. My hands shook as I tore it open, already knowing what I'd find. Sorry about your brother, it read in Comic Sans of all things. Asterisk hope he's in a better place now. At least you won't have to share the holidays anymore, asterisk. There was a little smiley face at the bottom. I stood there in the empty office, it was 7:15 a.m., still dark outside, and felt something inside me crack. Not break. Crack. Like ice under pressure, the kind that comes right before everything shatters. Funny, right? I jumped. Jake was standing behind me, hands in his pockets, that smirk plastered across his face. The same smirk he'd worn every single day for the past 3 months, ever since my brother Danny's funeral. Where did you get this? My voice came out steady, which surprised me. Oh, come on. He laughed, that braying laugh that made my skin crawl. I just thought you needed cheering up. You've been so gloomy lately. It's bringing down the whole team's energy. Jake was tall, broad-shouldered, the kind of guy who looked like he should be doing something important instead of managing a mid-tier corporate marketing division. He was the boss's nephew, which explained everything about why he'd been promoted over people who actually deserved it, and nothing about why he decided to make my grief his personal entertainment project. This isn't funny, I said. No. He leaned against the desk, casual, untouchable. I disagree. Last week at the meeting when you teared up talking about the Henderson account, that asterisk was funny. Did you see everyone trying not to laugh? Even Patricia was biting her lip. I set the card down on my desk with careful precision, because my hands wanted to do something else. Crumple it. Throw it at him. Worse. I filed 3 complaints with HR, I said quietly. Yeah, and they've filed 3 complaints with my uncle. He grinned. Who do you think that goes well for? He was right, and we both knew it. Brian Matthews, the company owner, was his uncle. Not even a distant uncle. They went to family dinners. They went fishing together. I'd heard Jake brag about it in the break room. You should get tougher skin, Jake continued, straightening up. Life's hard. Your brother learned that the hard way, I guess. Going out like that, wrapped around a telephone pole. That's rough. But you gotta move on, man. Can't let it eat you alive. I watched him walk away, back toward his office, the corner office, naturally, and felt that crack in my chest spread a little wider. 3 months. It had been 3 months since Danny died. 93 days since I'd gotten a call from the hospital while I was sitting in a status meeting, since I'd driven to the ICU in a daze, since they'd showed me into a room where my baby brother, my little brother, who was only 24, was lying broken on a hospital bed with machines doing the breathing for him. 93 days since I'd held his hand while the doctors explained about the accident on Route 9, about the drunk driver who'd hit him head-on, about the massive trauma and the swelling on his brain and the fact that he wasn't going to recover. 93 days since I'd made the decision to let him go. I'd used the next 2 weeks to arrange his funeral, to sit in a folding chair while people I hadn't seen since high school lined up to tell me he was in a better place, to listen to a priest talk about a kid he'd never met like he was reciting from a script. Then I'd come back to work because I needed the health insurance and I needed to not sit alone in my apartment with my thoughts. And Jake had decided that was hilarious. I saved the card. I don't know why at first, some part of me thought maybe I should keep evidence, as if I could somehow prove to HR that Jake was systematically tormenting me during the worst period of my life. But there wasn't much of a point. I'd already filed complaints. I already had dates and times and examples documented. What I didn't have was anyone in a position of power who actually cared. The morning ground on. I tried to work on the Riverside project, but my concentration was shot. I kept thinking about Danny, which was normal. Danny was always there now, always present in these moments, but it was different. Today it was the anger version of grief, the kind that made my jaw clench and my leg bounce under my desk. I was supposed to have dinner with our mother on Thursday. I'd have to pretend I was fine. I'd become very good at that over the past 3 months. Around noon, I took a walk. I needed to get out of the office, away from the fluorescent lights and the hum of the HVAC system and the knowledge that Jake was somewhere in this building, probably making jokes about me to whoever would listen. I walked down to the coffee place on the corner and ordered a drink I didn't particularly want, just to sit outside for 20 minutes and breathe air that didn't taste like office. That's when I saw them. Jake and a woman, walking together down the street toward the Riverside Hotel. She was blonde, professional looking, wearing a navy blazer. She wasn't anyone I recognized from the office. They were walking close enough that their hands brushed, and when they reached the hotel entrance, Jake put his hand on the small of her back. The gesture was intimate. Practiced. My brain caught up to what my eyes were seeing, and I felt something shift. Something cold and focused pushing out the raw grief and anger I'd been drowning in. I didn't know who that woman was. But I knew Jake was married. Everyone knew Jake was married. His wife was pregnant. Second kid. He talked about it constantly, always making crude jokes about how many kids he could manage, how he was basically a superhero. The woman and Jake disappeared into the hotel. I sat on the coffee shop bench, my drink growing cold in my hands, and made a decision that would eventually unravel everything. I was going to find out exactly what was going on. Hashtag chunk 2. The research started small. Obsessive, maybe, but small. I spent the next 3 days doing what I could from my desk without drawing attention. I pulled up our client list, cross-referencing names with the hotel's directory that I found online. The Riverside Hotel catered to business travelers and out-of-town clients. We had several accounts connected to companies in the area. That part was easy to justify if anyone asked what I was looking at. The blonde woman was harder. I didn't have a name, just a face I'd seen for maybe 5 seconds on a street corner. I spent Thursday evening doing something I wasn't proud of, scrolling through social media, looking for anyone who might match that description, trying to connect them to Jake somehow. LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram. Nothing jumped out. But I did find something else. Jake's wife, Michelle, had posted a photo to her Instagram that morning. It was a maternity photo, Jake's hand on her swollen belly, both of them smiling at the camera. The caption read, *, 5 months to go. So grateful for my amazing husband who's been so supportive through this pregnancy. #blessed #family, *. The post had 127 likes. Jake had commented with a string of heart emojis. I sat back in my chair and felt that cold thing in my chest settle deeper. I wasn't going to do anything crazy. I wasn't going to become some obsessed stalker digging into Jake's personal life just to get revenge for the sympathy card and the comments. That would make me the problem. That would make me the one who couldn't move on. I knew that logically. But I was curious now. And curiosity, I was learning, could be its own form of power. Friday morning, I called in sick. I hadn't taken a day off since Danny died, couldn't bear to sit home with my thoughts, but I made the call and went back to bed anyway, my laptop open beside me. I started with the hotel. The Riverside had a website, a booking system. I couldn't access guest records, obviously, but I could see when rooms were available, what kind of suites they offered. I looked at the employee directory. Nothing helpful there either. Then I tried something different. I searched for the woman's description online, blonde, professional, something about her had seemed familiar in a way I couldn't place, and I tried different combinations. Marketing professional. Sales. The Riverside area. At 11:47 a.m. on Friday, I found her. Her name was Victoria Chin. She was a business development manager for Harrington Industries, one of our company's major clients. Her LinkedIn photo showed her in a gray suit, blonde highlights catching the light, the same professional smile I'd seen on the street. She had 482 connections, a list of accomplishments I wasn't particularly interested in, and a wedding announcement from 2019. Harrington Industries. Our biggest client. The one whose accounts generated something like 35% of our annual revenue. And her husband's name was listed as Richard Chin, who worked in commercial real estate. I sat very still for a long moment. Then I did something that felt like crossing a line, and I clicked into her husband's profile. Richard Chin, 45, commercial real estate developer, active in the community, photos of him at charity events, photos of him at golf tournaments. Photos of him with Victoria at various events, her hand on his arm, both of them smiling at the camera. Recent post from 3 days ago, *, long week ahead with the Riverside Development Project. Grateful to have a partner I can always count on. #work #blessed *. The post was from Wednesday. The day Jake and Victoria had walked into the Riverside Hotel together. My phone buzzed. A text from my mother, *, still on for dinner tomorrow. I'm making Danny's favorite pasta. *. The grief came back suddenly, violently, replacing the cold focus. Danny's favorite pasta. Mom was still doing all those things, making his favorite meals, setting an extra place at the table in her mind. I wondered if that would ever stop. I texted back, *, see you at 6. Love you. *. I put the phone down and went back to the computer. What I was doing wasn't stalking. It was research. It was justice, maybe, or at least the beginning of understanding that the universe wasn't entirely random cruelty. Jake had spent 3 months making my life hell while his own life hummed along perfectly, the nephew, the promotion, the pregnant wife at home, the affair on the side. The kind of life where you could mock a grieving person and face no consequences because your uncle owned the company. But what if he did face consequences? Not because I made something up. Not because I was vindictive. But because I simply revealed what was already true. I created a new email account. Something generic and forgettable. I didn't send anything yet, I wasn't that impulsive. But I saved the email addresses, Victoria's work email, Richard's work email, Jake's work email, Michelle's personal email. I found Victoria's phone number through a public directory and saved it to my phone in a contact labeled client. I spent Friday afternoon mapping out the Riverside Hotel's location relative to our office, 8 blocks away, easy walking distance. I looked at their restaurant hours, their check-in procedures, their availability for the coming weeks. By Friday evening, I had constructed a framework. A skeleton of a plan that I hadn't yet decided whether to execute. I took a walk around the neighborhood instead of sitting in my apartment. The October air was crisp, the leaves starting to turn. Fall had always been Danny's favorite season. He used to drag me to pumpkin patches even though we were too old for it, laughing at his own jokes about gourds and squashes. He'd been a stupid, wonderful person, and he'd been 24 years old, and he'd been wrapped around a telephone pole because some drunk driver couldn't keep their car between the lines. And Jake had mocked him for it. I came home around 8 p.m. and sat at my kitchen table with my laptop. The email addresses were still there, waiting. What I was considering wasn't technically illegal. It was simple exposure. It was showing people the truth about a person's behavior. Infidelity was a crime against the people who mattered most, the spouse, the other betrayed spouse. The people who actually deserved to know. I wasn't creating the situation. I was just revealing it. I told myself that as I sat in the dark of my apartment, my dead brother's absence pressing against me like a physical thing, and I made the decision to see this through. Tomorrow was dinner with my mother. I would hold it together. I would be the supportive son. And then, on Monday, I would begin. Jake had started this. He'd made the choice to torment someone at their lowest point. He decided that cruelty was entertainment, that grief was material for jokes, that family was just leverage and other people's pain was a punchline. I was simply going to show him that actions had consequences. I just had to make sure I was right about what I'd seen. #Chunk3. The dinner with my mother was harder than I expected. She'd spent all afternoon cooking, Danny's favorite pasta carbonara, the real Roman kind that he'd insisted on making once after watching some cooking video, declaring that anyone who used cream was a culinary criminal. The memory hung over the kitchen like smoke. She'd even made his favorite tiramisu, though her hands shook a little as she layered the ladyfingers in the dish. You look tired, she said, watching me push food around my plate. Are you sleeping? Fine, I lied. Work's just been busy. She didn't push, which somehow made it worse. We ate in that careful silence that grief creates, the kind where silence feels safer than words because words might crack something open that neither of us was ready to handle. She asked about my apartment, about whether I was seeing anyone, about the usual things parents ask when they're trying to pretend that the enormous absence at the table doesn't exist. I left early, claiming fatigue, and she didn't argue. She hugged me at the door for longer than usual, and I felt the weight of Danny's death in her grip, all that accumulated sorrow and the particular pain of losing a child. It steadied something in me. Reminded me why I was doing this. Monday morning came with a clarity that felt almost dangerous. I arrived at the office early, before Jake usually showed up, and sat at my desk with my coffee going cold in front of me. The email account was ready. The addresses were saved. All I needed was to actually do it. The problem was evidence. I'd seen them together once. Circumstantial. I'd found Victoria's LinkedIn, confirmed she worked for our biggest client. I'd seen them walking toward a hotel. In a vacuum, that proved nothing. Jake could say they were discussing business. They could have been meeting a client there. The hotel had a conference center. He could produce an explanation that would hold up, especially with his uncle running the company. I needed more. I needed something irrefutable. So I did something that made my skin crawl even as I was planning it. I pulled up the company's calendar system, the shared one that tracked client meetings and business development, and I looked at Jake's schedule. It was technically accessible to anyone in the department, part of the new transparency initiative that had been implemented last year. Friday afternoon. A meeting labeled Harrington Industries, account review. Time blocked, 2 to 4 p.m. Location, Riverside Hotel, conference room B. My heart rate spiked. That wasn't a typical account review schedule. Most of those happened at the office or at the client's headquarters. And the duration was strange, 2 hours for something that usually took 40 minutes. I checked Victoria's email address on LinkedIn again and pulled up the company directory for Harrington Industries. She was listed. Business Development Manager. Email, chen@harringtonindustries.com. I could feel myself crossing into territory that felt different now. Not just research. Not just curiosity. This was active planning. I spent Tuesday and Wednesday doing something I'd never done before. I began to stalk Jake's location. Not physically, I was careful about that, aware of how that line could blur into something genuinely obsessive. But digitally. Our office building had a security system that logged when people entered and exited. It was supposed to be secure, but the IT department was understaffed and the log system was older, accessible through a portal that required a password that half the office knew. Derek from accounting had mentioned it once when complaining about how the company never invested in updated infrastructure. I borrowed his password on Wednesday morning by asking to check something on his computer while he was in a meeting. It took 10 seconds. The security logs were right there. Jake had left the office at 1:47 p.m. on Friday last week and returned at 4:23 p.m. 2 hours and 36 minutes. Exactly matching the calendar block for Harrington Industries, account review. I stared at the screen. This wasn't circumstantial anymore. This was pattern. But it still wasn't proof of infidelity. It was proof that Jake had met with Victoria Chen during his work hours, ostensibly for business. His lawyer could make that work. His uncle's lawyer definitely could. I needed something more concrete. I needed to see them actually together, actually doing something that couldn't be explained away as professional. I needed photos, or messages, or something that made the affair undeniable. Which meant I needed to follow him. I sat with that thought for a solid minute, feeling the weight of what I was considering. Stalking. Actual, literal stalking. The thing that separates investigation from obsession. The thing that makes you the villain of your own story. But then I thought about the sympathy cards. The jokes during the client meeting. The way Jake's face had looked when he was mocking my tears, that casual cruelty like he was commenting on the weather. I thought about my mother's hands shaking as she made Danny's favorite meal for a son who would never eat it again. I sent an email to Jake's address on Thursday morning from my generic email account, spoofing the Riverside Hotel's notification system as best I could. Asterisk reservation confirmation, Friday, October 22nd, 2 p.m. to 4 p.m., Suite 412. Business entertainment account, asterisk. I had no idea if it would work, if he'd even check a random email confirmation. But it felt like a test, a way to see if he'd repeat the pattern, if he'd actually scheduled another meeting. By Friday morning, I knew I was really doing this. I'd requested the afternoon off, a half day for a dentist appointment that didn't exist. I'd mapped the route from our office to the Riverside. I'd confirmed that Jake had that same calendar block again, 2 to 4 p.m. with Harrington Industries. My hands were shaking as I packed my bag around 1:30 p.m., making it look casual. One of the paralegals asked if I was feeling okay, and I realized I probably looked green. Fine, I said. Just need some air. I left the office at 1:45 p.m. and walked the 8 blocks to the Riverside Hotel, my phone in my pocket with its camera app ready, my chest tight with a feeling I couldn't quite name. Fear, maybe. Or the electricity of crossing a line I'd been standing in front of for a week. The Riverside's lobby was all polished marble and muted beige, the kind of anonymous luxury that said, nothing memorable happens here. I positioned myself near the elevator bank with a view of the entrance, pretending to check my phone, trying to look like I belonged. At 1:58 p.m., Jake walked through the front door. He was alone. He was wearing his work suit, his phone to his ear, talking about quarterly projections in that false jovial tone he used with clients. He didn't see me. He moved toward the elevator bank, and I felt my whole body go tense. At 2:04 p.m., Victoria Chen walked through the same doors. She was alone too. She was wearing a navy dress, her blonde hair down, and she carried herself the way confident people do, like the world was arranged specifically for them to walk through it. She didn't look at Jake. They didn't acknowledge each other. But they both moved toward the elevators at almost the same time. That's when I realized I had no idea what I would actually do with this moment. I pulled out my phone, my hands trembling, as I watched them step into the same elevator. And I took the picture. #chunk4. The photo was blurry. That was my first thought as I looked at the screen, my heart hammering so hard I thought people in the lobby might hear it. The elevator doors were closing, and I'd managed to capture Jake's shoulder, the back of Victoria's head, and a strip of polished steel that could have been any elevator in any building in the city. It proved nothing. It was useless. I stood there in the Riverside Hotel lobby with my phone in my shaking hands, feeling the weight of every terrible decision that had led me to this moment. I'd crossed the line. I'd become the person who followed coworkers to hotels, who lied about dentist appointments, who accessed security systems they weren't supposed to touch. And I had nothing to show for it but a blurry photo that could get me fired if discovered. The rational part of my brain, the part that sounded like my brother, honest and careful, was screaming at me to leave. To delete the photo. To go home and pretend this day never happened. To file another HR complaint and accept that Jake would never face consequences for what he'd done to me, just like he'd never faced consequences for anything else in his charmed, nepotistic life. But I didn't leave. Instead, I moved toward the elevator bank and pressed the call button. When the doors opened, I stepped inside and hit the button for the 4th floor, my mouth dry, my pulse thundering in my ears. This was it. This was the moment where I stopped being someone gathering information and became someone actively intruding on another person's privacy. This was where I became the kind of person I'd never thought I was capable of being. The 4th floor hallway was quiet and carpeted in that expensive way that muffled footsteps. Room 412 should be down the left corridor based on the numbering pattern I could see. I walked slowly, my phone still in my hand, trying to look like I belonged while my chest felt like it might cave in on itself. The hallway was empty. Completely, impossibly empty, like the universe was either encouraging me or testing me, and I wasn't sure which would be worse. I found the room. 412, the door was closed like every other door in the corridor. No sound came from inside. I stood in front of it, my hand raised, and I realized I had no idea what I was actually going to do. Knock. Record audio through the door. Just stand here and listen like some kind of deranged pervert. That's when I heard the voice from inside. It was muffled by the door, but it was unmistakably Jake's laugh, that particular laugh he used when he was pleased with himself, the one that had made me want to throw my stapler at him 100 times in the office. It was followed by a woman's voice, lower and softer, but still audible through the thick door. My phone was already in my hand. The camera was open. I could see the hallway reflected in the screen, empty and impossibly still. My thumb hovered over the record button. This was it. This was the moment where I could prove it. The door to the elevator at the far end of the hallway dinged. I jerked backwards so violently I nearly dropped my phone, shoving it into my pocket and turning away from the door. My legs felt like they didn't belong to me as I walked, not toward the elevators, which would mean I was leaving, but toward the ice machine I'd spotted around the corner. I needed to look like I had a reason to be on this floor. I needed to be someone getting ice, not someone recording outside a hotel room door. An older couple emerged from the elevator, and I thanked whatever merciful part of the universe existed that they turned in the opposite direction, barely glancing at me. I stood in front of the ice machine for what felt like an eternity, pretending to be confused by its operation, my mind racing through scenarios. I couldn't do this. I couldn't actually stand outside that door and record them. That was criminal. That was obsessive. That was the behavior of someone who had let their grief and anger transform them into something unrecognizable. That was the kind of thing that would destroy my life, not Jake's, the kind of thing that would give him legitimate grounds to have me arrested, to make me the villain instead of the victim. But I also couldn't leave without something. I couldn't go home with nothing but a blurry photo and the sound of Jake's laugh echoing in my ears. I walked back to the hallway. Room 412 was still closed. Still quiet except for the muffled sounds of movement inside. I could hear Jake talking again, something about his wife, something about how she was exhausting, something about how Victoria was so much easier to be around. The words hit me like physical blows, not because I cared about Jake's personal problems, but because they represented the casual destruction he left in his wake. His pregnant wife at home. A baby on the way. And he was in a hotel room saying she was exhausting. I raised my phone and took another photo of the door. Then I took another one of the room number. Then I turned and walked toward the elevators, moving quickly now, my hands shaking so badly I wasn't sure I could press the button correctly. Back in the lobby, I sat on one of the marble benches near the entrance and tried to breathe normally. My phone felt like it was burning in my pocket. I'd taken photos. I'd accessed security systems. I'd used a spoofed email. I'd followed someone to a hotel. I'd stood outside their room and listened to their private conversation. The worst part was that I felt almost nothing. No shame, no regret, not even the electric thrill I might have expected. Just a cold, clear certainty that I would do whatever came next. That I would keep going until Jake paid for what he'd done to me, to my mother, to my brother's memory. I pulled out my phone and stared at the photos I'd taken. The blurry elevator. The door. The room number. It wasn't much. But it was a start. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother, *, hope your dentist appointment went well. Thinking of you, *. I stared at those words for a long time. Then I deleted the text thread and put my phone away. When Jake emerged from the elevator at 3:47 p.m. with Victoria Chin 10 minutes behind him, maintaining plausible deniability, I realized, in case anyone was watching, I was still sitting there, invisible in plain sight, and I was already planning what came next. #Chunk5. The next morning, I woke up to 17 missed calls from my mother. For a terrible second, my stomach dropped into my shoes. That was the ringtone pattern of my nightmares now, the repeated insistence that something catastrophic had happened, that I was about to receive news that would shatter whatever fragile stability I'd managed to construct in the 2 years since my brother died. My hands moved before my brain caught up, pulling up her contact and calling back with my heart already in my throat. "Oh, thank God," she said before I'd even said hello. "Are you okay? Are you at work? Why weren't you answering your phone? Mom, what's wrong? Are you okay?" "I'm fine, honey. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have called so many times. I had a panic attack this morning and I kept trying to reach you and when you didn't answer I thought," she stopped, steadied herself. "I'm being ridiculous. The grief counselor said it would happen sometimes, that anniversaries and random triggers would catch me off guard." I closed my eyes. My brother had been dead for 23 months. Not quite 2 years. I'd marked it in my calendar, and apparently my subconscious had marked it in my body, even though I hadn't consciously acknowledged it. I'm okay, I said, and felt like a liar. I'm sorry I didn't have my phone on me. Are you sure you're alright? We talked for another 10 minutes, the usual dance where we assured each other we were fine and neither of us quite believed it. When I hung up, I sat on the edge of my bed feeling hollowed out in a way that had nothing to do with my investigation into Jake. This was the thing nobody told you about grief. It didn't get better in a linear way. You didn't heal incrementally, month by month, gradually getting stronger like a bone mending. Instead, you could go weeks feeling almost normal, and then something, a song, a smell, a pattern of phone calls, would send you spiraling backward into the raw agony as if the funeral had been last week instead of 2 years ago. And I was channeling that agony into my vendetta against Jake, which was either the healthiest or unhealthiest coping mechanism I could possibly have chosen, and I no longer had the clarity to determine which. I made it to work by 8:15 a.m., 20 minutes earlier than usual. The office was mostly empty except for Janet in accounting and, of course, Jake, who was already at his desk looking annoyingly well-rested for a man having an affair. He didn't even look up as I passed his desk, didn't acknowledge my existence, which somehow made it worse. He was so comfortable in his cruelty, so assured of his immunity that he couldn't even be bothered to notice me anymore. I planned to spend the day organizing the information I'd gathered, but I found myself unable to focus. Instead, I found myself opening a new email account, this one legitimately created with a VPN and a burner phone number, and staring at the contact information I'd found for Jake's wife, Sarah, on their family Christmas card from 3 years ago that I tracked down through a public Facebook photo album. My finger hovered over the compose button for 40 minutes. This was the moment. Not standing outside the hotel room, that had been impulsive, driven by emotion. But this moment, this premeditated decision to reach out to his wife, this was the point of no return. Once I sent this email, once I opened the door to bringing other people into this situation, I couldn't close it again. I thought about my mother's voice on the phone this morning, shaky and scared because she'd panicked when she couldn't reach me. I thought about what Jake had said in the hotel room about his wife being exhausting. I thought about Sarah Chen, sitting at home pregnant with her second child, probably tired and bloated and hormonal, while her husband was in a hotel room with a colleague complaining about her. I closed the email without typing anything and decided to do something worse instead. During lunch, I accessed the company directory through my computer and found the contact information for Victoria Chen's husband. His name was David, and he worked in commercial real estate downtown. His LinkedIn photo showed a handsome man with kind eyes and 3 children already listed in his family section. 3 children, and his wife was spending her lunch hours in hotel rooms with Jake. I could have emailed him. I could have sent him the photos. But instead, I found myself calling his office number, my heart rate skyrocketing as the phone rang. David Chen's office, a cheerful receptionist answered. I hung up. I sat at my desk with my hands shaking, realizing what I'd almost done, what I was still planning to do. This wasn't about justice anymore. This wasn't about my brother or about the cruelty Jake had inflicted on me. This was about destruction for its own sake, about having so much rage inside me that it had to go somewhere, and I decided it should go into methodically dismantling the lives of 2 families I'd never even met. My phone buzzed. A Slack message from Jake, of all people. Asterisk, can you grab the Riverside Hotel conference room for next Thursday afternoon? I need it for a client meeting. Thanks, asterisk. The audacity. The absolute shamelessness of it. He was asking me to book a room at the exact place where I'd followed him, where I'd listened to him denigrate his wife, where he continued to conduct his affair with such careless confidence that he didn't even bother to hide his movements. Sure, I typed back, my fingers barely shaking now. Asterisk great. 2 p.m. I'll need it for about 2 hours, asterisk. 2 hours. What did he think he was, to request time blocks for his infidelity like it was a board meeting? What kind of person operated with this level of entitlement? I approved the reservation without responding further. Then I opened a new browser tab and started looking at hotel security footage requirements, wondering if there was a way to obtain it, or if I'd have to find another method entirely. This was the dangerous part, the part where I could feel myself slipping further from the person I'd been before grief had rewired my brain into something sharp and vengeful. My mother's panicked voice from this morning echoed in my head, reminding me that I wasn't invincible, that my actions had consequences for the people around me too. But I also couldn't stop. The rage had taken root too deeply now. It had grown into something with its own momentum, its own gravity, and all I could do was hold on and hope I survived what came next. #chunk6. The email came on Wednesday afternoon, 3 days after I'd booked the Riverside Hotel conference room for Jake's client meeting. It was from an address I didn't recognize, contact.verification.services@gmail.com. The subject line read, account security alert. My stomach twisted as I opened it. Asterisk, we've detected unusual activity on your email account, including the creation of a forwarding rule that automatically sends copies of incoming messages to an external address. Please verify your account immediately to prevent unauthorized access, asterisk. I stared at the message for a full 30 seconds before the implications crashed over me like a wave. Someone had accessed my burner email account. My hands went cold. The account I'd created specifically to contact Sarah and David, the account that only existed to hold the photographs and evidence against Jake, had been breached. I immediately checked the security settings and found exactly what the email had warned me about, a forwarding rule I'd never created, sending copies of every message to an address that appeared to be a string of random numbers. I closed my laptop so hard the screen flickered. This wasn't possible. I'd been careful. I'd used a VPN, a burner phone number purchased with cash from a convenience store, and I'd accessed the account exclusively from my personal devices. There was no way Jake could have. But it wasn't necessarily Jake, was it? That was the problem. I'd been so focused on him that I hadn't considered the possibility of other threats, other people who might be aware of what I was doing. I needed to think. I went to the bathroom and locked myself in a stall, sitting on the toilet seat with my hands pressed against my face. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead with a sound that felt like it was drilling directly into my skull. My breath came shallow and fast, and I had to remind myself that hyperventilating wouldn't help anything. Someone knew I was investigating Jake. The forwarding rule meant they'd probably seen the photographs already, or at least knew that I had them. The security alert could have been genuine. I'd honestly gotten the impression that I'd created the account correctly, but the forwarding rule was definitely real, which meant someone had actively gone into my email settings and set it up themselves. The question was, who? Jake seemed unlikely, honestly. He wasn't tech-savvy enough for that kind of intrusion, and he still didn't know I was the one following him. But Victoria Chen's husband, David? What if he had access to security consultants or IT professionals? What if Victoria had gotten suspicious and hired someone to investigate who'd been following them? Or, and this thought made my skin prickle, what if it was the company? What if IT had flagged my account for unusual activity and someone in management had decided to investigate? What if this was about to blow up in my face before I'd even properly set it in motion? I forced myself to breathe. In, count to 4. Hold for 4. Out for 4. I needed to salvage this. The forwarding rule meant whoever had breached my account had seen any emails I'd received, but I hadn't actually sent anything yet. The photographs were stored on my personal phone and backed up to an encrypted external drive hidden in my apartment. As long as I hadn't put them in that email account, they were safe. As long as I hadn't. I pulled out my phone and checked my sent folder on the burner account. Empty. No drafts. No history of me organizing the photographs into any kind of organized format. I'd been planning to do that, had been working up the courage to actually send the first email, and the breach had stopped me before I committed to action. It was almost like the universe was giving me a warning. I stayed in the bathroom for another 5 minutes, then went back to my desk and deleted the burner email account entirely. I cleared my browser history, removed the VPN app from my phone, and told myself I was being smart. Careful. This was a sign to slow down and reassess. But I didn't feel smart. I felt cornered. At 4:30 p.m., Jake stopped by my desk with a printout in his hand, an actual physical piece of paper, which meant whatever this was about, he wanted it documented. Hey, he said, his voice that particular brand of casual that made my skin crawl. I need you to handle something for me. I looked up. He had the expression of someone who just won something. The Riverside Hotel conference room booking you made for next Thursday, he said. I need you to cancel it. My blood went absolutely still in my veins. Why? I managed. Change of plans. The client meeting got pushed to the following week, and I'm going to need the room booked for Tuesday instead. Can you take care of that? He was lying. I knew he was lying. The way his eyes wouldn't quite meet mine, the way he was holding the printout like it was a shield, the specific phrasing of his request, all of it screamed that something had shifted. Sure, I said, hating how steady my voice sounded. I can do that. Great. Thanks. He started to walk away, then paused. Turned back. Hey, you doing okay? You seem kind of stressed lately. I wanted to laugh. Actually, hysterically laugh. I wanted to ask him if he was seriously asking about my well-being while I was literally sitting on evidence of his affair and he was canceling hotel rooms because something had spooked him. I'm fine, I said instead. Just a lot going on. Yeah, I get it. He nodded like he was commiserating, like we were friends having a moment of mutual understanding. Work's been intense. Maybe take a mental health day or something. You've been looking rough. He walked away before I could respond. I sat at my desk for the next 2 hours, unable to focus on anything, running through scenarios in my head. Had he found out I was following him? Had someone warned him about the email account breach? Was he canceling the meeting because he suspected a trap, or was it genuinely just a scheduling change? The uncertainty was worse than the fear. At least fear was directional, you could point at it and know what you were dealing with. This was just a sense of ground shifting beneath me, the feeling that I'd been playing a game I didn't fully understand the rules to. When I got home that evening, I did something I'd been avoiding. I called my mother back. Hi, honey, she answered immediately, like she'd been waiting for my call. How are you? I'm okay, I said, and this time I knew I was lying. Just wanted to hear your voice. We talked for an hour about nothing important, her book club drama, my cousin's new job, the weather. It was the most normal conversation I'd had in weeks, and by the end of it, I felt slightly more tethered to reality. But as I hung up, I looked at the encrypted drive hidden in my apartment, at the photographs stored on my phone, at the life I'd been systematically building a case against, and I realized something terrifying. I didn't know how to stop now. Even if I wanted to. Hashtag chunk 7. The next morning, I woke up to 3 missed calls from an unknown number and a voicemail I almost didn't listen to. The voice belonged to a woman I didn't recognize, professional, clipped, businesslike. This is Detective Sarah Moreno with the State Police. I'm calling regarding an ongoing investigation. Please contact me at your earliest convenience. She left a number and a case reference that meant nothing to me. I played it 3 times. My first instinct was panic, pure, crystalline panic that made my hands shake as I held the phone. Then rational thought kicked in, what investigation? What could possibly connect to anything I'd done? The email breach? Had someone actually reported it? But that wouldn't be a police matter, would it? That would be internal corporate stuff. Unless. The thought crept in slowly, then all at once, what if someone had reported the stalking? What if Victoria or David had contacted the police about being followed, and they traced it back to me somehow? I'd been so careful, but careful wasn't the same as invisible. I'd been at that hotel multiple times. I'd taken pictures. Even with the burner phone and VPN, there were probably cameras, probably a trail if someone looked hard enough. I called the number back before I could talk myself out of it. Detective Moreno, she answered on the second ring, like she'd been waiting. Thanks for getting back to me so quickly. I'm sorry, I said, my voice coming out higher than normal. I'm not sure what this is about. I haven't done anything wrong. No one said you did, she replied, and I could almost hear the smile in her voice, that particular tone cops use when they want you to feel safe enough to keep talking. I'm actually calling because your name came up in connection with an HR complaint filed at your company. Can you tell me about your relationship with your coworker, Jake Morrison? All the air left my lungs. What kind of complaint? I managed. That's actually what I'm calling to clarify, she said. Your HR department filed a report regarding potential workplace harassment and intimidation. They mentioned that you've made several complaints about this employee's behavior toward you, and that those complaints weren't properly addressed. We've been looking into whether there's a pattern of behavior that might warrant further investigation. I was hoping to get your account of what's been happening. I sat down on my bed, my mind racing. HR had filed a report with the police. How? When? I'd complained to them a dozen times and they'd done nothing, and now suddenly they were escalating to law enforcement. It didn't make sense unless someone had forced their hand. I'm sorry, I said slowly. I'm just confused about the timing. Did something happen? That's what I'm trying to determine, Detective Moreno said. She had the patient tone of someone used to confused witnesses. What I can tell you is that we received a complaint this morning from your company's legal department. They mentioned that there's been an allegation of harassment that was systematically ignored despite multiple formal reports, and they're concerned about liability. They want to make sure we document everything properly. Oh God. This was bad. This was worse than bad. This meant that somewhere in the corporate machinery, someone had decided that they needed to cover their ass, which meant they were suddenly interested in Jake's behavior toward me, but that also meant they were probably reviewing every interaction, every email chain, probably getting security footage and going through things with a microscope. Which meant if they were looking at Jake, they might also look at me. When you say allegations, I said carefully, are you asking me about Jake's behavior, or are you investigating something about my conduct? There was a pause. I'm investigating the harassment complaint that was filed on your behalf, she said. Your behavior isn't what I'm calling about, unless there's something you think I should know. A trap. Classic interview technique, create space for guilty people to confess to things. Except I hadn't done anything illegal. I'd followed someone in public, taken pictures in public places, and accessed information I'd found on my own. Creepy, maybe. Obsessive, definitely. But illegal? No, I said, and tried to make my voice sound normal. I'm just asking because it's been a stressful situation and I want to make sure I understand what's happening. We talked for another 15 minutes. I gave her a sanitized version of events, the jokes about my brother, the fake sympathy cards, the mockery during meetings, the way HR had blown off my complaints. I didn't mention the affair, didn't mention the hotel or the photographs or any of it. I just talked about Jake's cruelty and my company's negligence, and by the end of the call, Detective Moreno was expressing genuine sympathy for what I'd been dealing with. We'll be reaching out to Mr. Morrison as well, she said as we wrapped up. And to your HR department. Just so you know, this process can take a few weeks. In the meantime, if the harassment escalates or if you feel unsafe, please don't hesitate to contact me directly. I promised I would, hung up, and immediately felt sick. The problem was that this actually solved one problem while creating 3 new ones. Jake's behavior was finally being taken seriously, which meant something had to happen, which meant his life was actually going to face consequences. That was good. That was what I wanted. But the police involvement meant there were now official records, a detective actually investigating, scrutiny being applied. And if they looked hard enough at anything, would they find my tracks? I spent the entire day in a fog of anxiety. I went to work, avoided Jake, and tried to look normal while my brain ran through catastrophic scenarios. What if they requested phone records? What if they reviewed the hotel security footage and saw me there multiple times? What if someone at the hotel recognized me from the stalking and had already reported it? Around 3 p.m., I got a message in the company chat from Jake, *, need to reschedule our one-on-one meeting. HR said I can't meet with employees alone right now. My lawyer advised against it. How's Friday look, *. His lawyer. He was already lawyered up. That night, I sat in my apartment and made a decision, I needed to move faster. Not recklessly, but decisively. The police investigation meant the window was closing. Jake now knew something was happening, even if he didn't know exactly what. The email breach meant someone else knew I had evidence. And my own behavior was under scrutiny in a way I hadn't fully anticipated. I pulled out the encrypted drive and looked at the photographs again. 6 months of documentation. Hours of his time at the hotel with Victoria, receipts I'd photographed, the timeline of meetings that weren't actually meetings. I had to use this now, while I still could. #Chunk8. I sent the package on a Thursday. Not an email, I'd learned my lesson about digital trails. I printed everything, the photographs, the hotel receipts, the timeline of client meetings that never appeared on any official calendar. I used a color printer at an internet cafe 3 towns over, wore gloves, and paid in cash. The originals went into a manila envelope addressed to Sarah Chen, David's wife, sent via certified mail from a postal facility I'd never visited before. The second envelope went to David Chen himself, at his office. The third went to our company's general counsel. I didn't include a note. The evidence spoke for itself. Then I waited. The fallout started on Friday morning. I was at my desk, deliberately visible, when I heard shouting from Jake's office. His door slammed hard enough that people 3 cubicles away looked up. By noon, he was gone, escorted out by security, his personal effects in a box, his badge deactivated. The office hummed with speculation. I stayed quiet, kept my head down, and tried not to show the mixture of relief and dread churning in my stomach. The dread was winning. Detective Moreno called me at 2 p.m. I'm not sure what you want to tell me, she said, and her voice had lost that sympathetic edge, but I just got a very interesting call from your company's legal team. They informed me that they've discovered evidence of Mr. Morrison's infidelity, potential misuse of company resources for personal affairs, and possibly some expense fraud related to hotel charges. They're asking whether this information is relevant to my investigation. My heart was hammering so hard I thought she could probably hear it through the phone. I don't know anything about that, I said carefully. Right, she said, and there was something in that single word, knowing, but not accusatory. Well, here's the thing. I've been doing this job for 17 years. I know what an anonymous tip looks like, and I know what targeted evidence looks like. And I know what it looks like when someone who's been wronged decides to take matters into their own hands. I didn't respond. What I don't know, she continued, is whether you broke any laws in gathering that information. Which means I need to ask you directly, did you access any computer systems, emails, or private networks without authorization? The question hung in the air like a blade. No, I said, and it was technically true. I'd accessed the information myself, not hacked into anything. Did you physically follow or surveil anyone in a way that would constitute stalking? This one was harder. I'd been in public places, taken public photographs. But the pattern, the intentionality, the obsession, that was something else entirely. I observed someone in public, I said slowly. That's not illegal. Another pause. Then, you know what? I don't actually need you to confess to anything. Because here's what's happened. Your company's legal department is now so concerned about their liability in ignoring your harassment complaints that they've essentially handed me a case against Jake Morrison for fraud and infidelity. His wife has retained a divorce attorney. The client he was having the affair with. His marriage is imploding, and his business partner is considering dissolving their partnership. And none of that came from me, and none of it came from anything that would hold up in court if you'd obtained it illegally. It all came from your company's own investigation once they decided to take your complaint seriously. I realized I'd been holding my breath. So here's what I'm going to do, Detective Moreno said. I'm going to close my investigation into Jake Morrison's harassment of you, with a determination that workplace misconduct occurred and was negligently ignored. That gives you actual legal protection and puts your company on notice. And I'm not going to ask any more questions about how evidence came to light, because frankly, I don't want to know. But I'm going to say this once, and you need to listen carefully. Whatever you did to gather information about this man's personal life, you need to stop. Completely. I don't care if you see him on the street. You ignore him. You don't follow him, you don't contact him, you don't try to find out what he's doing. You move on. Do you understand me? Yes, I whispered. Say it like you mean it. I understand. It's over. Good, she said. For what it's worth, I think he deserved worse. But that's not how the law works, and it's not how you want to live your life. You've got your justice. Now you need to get your peace. She hung up. I sat at my desk for a long time, just breathing. Around me, the office continued its normal rhythm, and I realized something had shifted. The weight I'd been carrying, the obsession, the documentation, the carefully laid plans, it didn't have the same gravity anymore. It had done what it was supposed to do. Jake's marriage was ending. His career was over. His reputation was destroyed. And I was still here. That night, I drove out to the cemetery where my brother was buried. I brought flowers, his favorite, sunflowers, and sat on the grass in front of his headstone for a long time without saying anything. I'm sorry, I finally said. Not for what I did. For what it made me become while I was doing it. The wind moved through the trees, and I could almost imagine he was listening. Over the next few weeks, I learned the details that circulated through the office grapevine. Jake's wife filed for divorce and got custody of the children. Victoria's husband left her. The clients they'd both been working with took their business elsewhere. Jake eventually took a job at a small firm in a different state, one where nobody knew his name. I wrote about the obsession and the revenge, and how it had felt righteous and necessary in the moment, but how ultimately it had only prolonged my suffering. I wrote that I was finally ready to let him rest. And I meant it.